On the stand, Bobby Dassey says he saw Teresa Halbach. But when the defense starts asking questions, the timeline starts to slip. And you won't believe what was kept from the defense about Bobby that could have changed everything. In the last episode, we heard from Trooper Austin. This is a scene reconstruction expert with the Wisconsin State Patrol. Now, ideally, we were supposed to be hearing from or have the defense take on Bobby Dassey. But as we found out, they had never even interviewed him. And so after what he said in his first piece of testimony with the prosecution, and I'll link to that in the show notes, they needed some time to kind of regroup and figure some stuff out. So in the meantime, while they were given time to do this, they're like, hey, we're just going to go ahead and continue with the next witness, who happened to be this trooper, Tim Austin. And let me tell you, he takes you deep into the weeds. He walked the jury through forensic mapping of the Avery salvage yard. It told us what equipment he used to do this, and says that over the course of a week in November of 2005, he and his team had logged over 4,100 different measurements across this salvage yard. They then used all this data to create these diagrams and three-dimensional models of these key locations. They were kind of designed to give the jurors kind of this virtual tour. Think of like, when you go online and you look for houses and stuff like that, you get a virtual tour of the property. This is like that kind of, but very, very, very crude. Remember, we're dealing with like 2005, 2006 technology. So not that great. It kind of looks like something you'd see out of Minecraft. And at the end of it all, the prosecution tried to play this animation that supposedly tied all of this together. But, surprise, surprise, the tech didn't cooperate. So we ended with a promise to show it sometime later. And the defense is already now, after this witness, Austin, is on the stand, the defense is all ready to dig into, finally, the cross-examination of Bobby Dassey. And that's what we have for you today. Real quick, before we jump in, if you've been following this series and you want to support all the work that goes into it, a really simple way to do that is to leave a tip. It's like a little tip jar at ko-fi.com/beachhouse34. It's ko-fi.com/beachhouse34, one word. And if you would actually like to see some exhibits, the ones that I have access to quite a few of them, actually. If you want to see these exhibits, I have this same exact podcast over at YouTube at youtube.com/beachhouse34. But instead of just the audio, you also get the video. So you actually get to see all of the different exhibits that were shown in this trial. So with all that said, let's get on with this episode. And we finally get to hear the defense question Bobby Dassey. And we begin on day 4. And at this point, the jury is not present. And the court says, at this time, the court calls State of Wisconsin versus Stephen Avery, gives the case number, etc. We are here this morning for the continuation of the trial in this matter. Will the parties again state their appearances for the record? And then the prosecutor and the defense attorneys state their presences. And the court then continues and says, all right, I will indicate for the record that before we began, I met in chambers with counsel briefly to discuss the agenda for the day. It's my understanding that after we bring the jury out, the state is going to first complete the demonstration associated with the last witness yesterday in the form of an animation, and that the parties are agreeable to the state presenting the animation without Mr. Austin being recalled to the stand. I'm sorry. So they finally got their video working. Yes, good for them. Attorney Strang, one of the defense attorneys, says, that's right. I understand it's just going to be played once straight through without narration, and that's fine. The court says, okay. And the parties were also discussing a potential stipulation for the court relating to the testimony of the next witness. And Attorney Kratz, the prosecutor, says, Judge, the prosecution team has discussed that. We would entertain such a stipulation, but only after we hear what the cross-examination is of this next witness. The state is unwilling to enter into a stipulation at this time, but I will candidly tell the court that if the cross goes as expected and as represented, it is very likely that we will agree to that request. Yeah. And the court says, all right, Mr. Strang, again, one of the defense attorneys. And he says, I can't force a stipulation. And the court says, okay, very well. We'll address that matter then after we complete Mr. Dassey's testimony. Okay, so I'm going to pause here because I'm not an attorney. I don't know what the hell they mean by this freaking, stipulation shit. It's really confusing. So I tried to find out what this meant. And here's what I learned. Okay. This word stipulation, it's one of these words, it gets tossed around a lot. And I'm recording this after I have done this entire recording. So it's also brought up at the end. Essentially, just what it means is a stipulation is an agreement between both sides, the prosecution and the defense, about a certain fact or piece of testimony. And if they agree on this stipulation, they don't need to argue about it in court or have a witness explain it, because both sides are saying, yeah, look, we're not going to fight about this part. So in this case, the defense was hoping to reach a stipulation with the prosecution, basically to agree in advance about part of what the next witness would say. But Kratz, the prosecutor, says not yet, and told the judge that they'd consider it after hearing how the cross-examination goes. So they weren't ready to lock anything in until they saw what kind of questions the defense was really going to ask. And if it went the way that they expected, then they'd probably agree to the stipulation. And so the defense attorney, Strang, didn't push back or anything. He's just like, look, I can't force the stipulation, and left it at that. And then the testimony or the courtroom goings on is continuing. Anything else to take up before we bring in the jury? Anything else before we bring in the jury counsel? Attorney Strang says, no, Your Honor. Attorney Kratz says, I don't think so, Judge. The court says, all right, the jury can be called in. And so the jury is brought in. They are now present. And the court tells them that they may be seated, and then continues. Members of the jury, before we get started with the first witness today, you may recall that there was a short animation. It is this freaking animation scheduled to be shown at the end of Mr. Austin's testimony yesterday. I'm informed that the technical difficulties have now been ironed out, and counsel has agreed to present the animation to the jury without recalling Mr. Austin to the stand. Is that correct, counsel? And Attorney Kratz says, yes, Judge. And the court says, all right, Mr. Kratz, you may proceed. And then it just says, animation viewed. Yay, they got that done. Attorney Kratz and says, for the record, Judge, that was exhibit number 117, 117. That's all we have for Trooper Austin. Thank you, Judge. And the court says, thank you. And before we took the testimony of Mr. Austin yesterday, I believe we left off with cross-examination of Bobby Dassey. So at this time, you can bring Mr. Dassey in and the defense can begin their cross-examination. And Attorney Kratz then says, can we approach just briefly? And the court says, sure. And then there's a sidebar taken, which is interesting because, in the past episodes, this has been brought up that this is not necessarily something that the state of Wisconsin wants people to have or wants these attorneys to have, or these sidebars, but yet they constantly have been called in this case. Anyway, the court then says, members of the jury, as you can see, the picture on the computer screen there is a little out of kilter. We have a technical person who is going to adjust the projector. Attorney Kratz then says, it sounds like it's a setting on the projector. It's something during the break that the techs can take care of. And the court says, all right. Attorney Strang, one of the defense attorneys, says, can you switch that over to Elmo, which is this overhead projector? Attorney Kratz says, sure. And then the clerk says, please raise your right hand. And then again, Bobby Dassey is called as a witness, but this time he is being cross-examined by the defense. And the cross-examination begins by Attorney Strang. Good morning. Welcome back. Good morning. Did you grow up on the salvage yard that you described living at yesterday? Just my high school years in school. That is, you were living with your mom? Yes. With Barb Janda? Yes. You described your stepdad yesterday, right? Yeah, Tom. His name was Tom. Is Tom Janda? Yes. Your mom is now married to another fellow named Scott Taddick? Yes. You are the second of 4 boys? Yes. All of you have the last name Dassey? Yes. From Pete Dassey? Yes. Your natural father? Yes. And Brian is older than you? Yes. Then there is you, Bobby? Yep. All right. Then we have got Brendan. No, I'm sorry. We have got Blaine. Yep. And Brendan is the youngest of the 4 brothers. Yes. So Brian, the oldest boy, oldest son, already was out of Barb's house back on Halloween 2005. Yes, he would come and go once in a while. He lived nearby, but didn't sleep there most nights. Yeah. So you and your 2 younger brothers were still living with your mom, Barb Janda? Yes. You had been there since about the time you began high school? Yes, 2001, we moved in. Were you living in the mobile home? Yes. Same one, same place? Yes. Stephen Avery, who lived just to the west of you, is your uncle? Yes. Your mom's brother? Yes. And then you also had an uncle Chuck living on the salvage yard property? Yes. That's also your mom's brother? Yes. And he lives back around to the southeast, sort of, behind the office buildings and the other buildings of the business, right? Yes. In a trailer home there? Yes. Grandpa and grandma live there? Yes. That is your mom's mother and father? Yes. Ellen and Dolores? Yes. Them in the back? Yep. Okay. And they live up right off the parking lot in the main area of the business? Yes. They have a double wide trailer? Yes. And a garage attached? Yes. Or at least next, yeah, to the trailer. You also have an Uncle Earl, your mother's brother, Earl, don't you? Yes. Earl is married to a woman named Candy? Yes. Earl and Candy don't live on the salvage yard. No. Property? They live nearby too? Yes. And Earl, in fact, works at the salvage yard? Yes. Chuck works at the salvage yard? Yes. And after Steve got out of prison, he came to work at the salvage yard? Yes. Your grandpa Alan had started the salvage yard? Yes. But he is not quite as active. The adult boys are basically running the business? Yes. Your mom works elsewhere? Yes. And back about Halloween of 2005, she had a factory job? Yes. Did she work first shift? Yes. So she's up and out of the house pretty early in the morning? Yes. About the time you are getting home, probably before. Back then? Before you even got home? Yeah. Okay. So you are getting off work at 6 in the morning from your 3rd shift? Yep. And by the time you are home at 6:15, 6:30, she's already gone? Yeah. She would then come home mid-afternoon? Yes. What goes on at a salvage yard business, Mr. Dassey? Well, they sell used parts for cars, the people that need these parts. Okay. Do they also need some car repair? Once in a while, yeah. Okay. Did you ever work for the salvage yard? For one summer? I mean, for wages? Yeah. Okay. What did you do that summer that you worked at the salvage yard? I just changed colors. Changed tires and stripped cars. What do you mean by stripping cars? Taking all the stuff that you can get money for off of them. After you have stripped the car, taken all the valuable spare parts off, where do the things you stripped off go? Into piles. Where does the rest of the car go? It goes down to be crushed. Okay. And some of the cars now look like they are lined up in rows and they are not crushed. Is that the area you guys call the pit? Yes. And why are some of the cars not crushed, but just lined up in rows down there? Because them are the cars that are still good and they can still sell stuff off of. You can still strip some parts off of? Yes. Some of them pretty old? Yes. Others pretty new? Yes. How do cars get to come to the salvage yard? How is it that a car would end up there? People call them, they go pick it up. The Avery salvage business runs a wrecker? Yes. Or towing service? Yes. Okay. So let's say there is a car crash and one or both of the cars is totaled. Might those end up at the salvage yard? Yes, if they are called by a police department or a fire department or, yeah, or private people? Yeah. Any of those? Yeah. Okay. You saw wrecked cars, and that is cars that have been in a crash, come in the summer you worked there? Yes. Some of those cars, because there's been a car crash, some of them have blood in them? Yes. And are there any parts from a car when you are stripping it that you might melt down? Yes. What would that be? Like aluminum. What's aluminum on a car? Like rims, transmission, all that stuff. Transmission is probably the biggest cast aluminum. Yes. Piece on a car. Does the Avery salvage yard have a place to melt down aluminum rims? Yes. Or aluminum transmissions? Yes. Where is that? It is in the old shop building. Up around that parking lot area? Yes. And what is this thing that melts down the aluminum transmission? It's called a smelter. Okay. Big thing, small thing. Have you ever seen how it works? It's pretty big. Do you know how it works? It is heated by propane. That's all I really know. There's a big outdoor propane tank next to it. Yep. And you say people would come there to buy spare parts. Are these just people who are maybe fixing their own car in the garage? Yes. Or restoring an older car, something like that, hobby type people? Yes. Independent small repair garage people, do they ever come to buy parts to put on cars that they might be fixing for customers of theirs? Yes. One of the cars that we have seen over and over again, I think that you talked about, was this maroon, I think you said 1989 Plymouth Voyager minivan? Yes. That was your mom's car, and you know that? Yes. It was for sale back around Halloween 2005? Yes. That Stephen was helping her sell it? Yes. Did it eventually sell? No. At the same time that one was for sale, were you aware of other cars that may have been for sale or on and off, for sale, whether they were actively advertised or not? Yes. Such as Stephen had a Chevy Blazer for sale and a Monte Carlo. Where were those kept, if you know? Up at the end of our driveway. This was back around Halloween of 2005? Yes. At the end of your driveway. Do you mean there's a road that comes down? If you take a right instead of going into the salvage yard business, there is a road, yes, that runs east-west there near the north side of the property? Yes. Is that the driveway you are referring to? Yes. That actually goes down to a little loop driveway in front of your house? Yes. And then sort of goes into Steve's garage? Yes. So it would have been up toward the main road, so to speak. Yes. By the entrance to the business? Mailbox. Or the entrance to the office? Yes. Now, yesterday, Mr. Kratz asked you about a conversation that happened in your garage with your friend Mike was there? Yes. Is Mike Osmondson? Yes. Or Michael Osmondson, but you call him Mike? Yes. How do you know you were in the garage, your garage, when this conversation happened? Because we just arrived home and we entered the garage. What was going on in the garage? We bought some climbing sticks that night for hunting and we were putting them together. Climbing sticks are little sticky pads you put on the rungs to climb up a deer stand? Yes. So your boots don't slip and you fall off and break your neck? Yes. You were doing that with Mike in the garage? Yes. Roughly what time? Do you remember you guys were doing this? Probably 6:30, 7 o'clock, somewhere in that range? Yes. And there was a deer? Yes. Okay. What was This was a deer that was hanging at that point? Yes, in the garage. Was the deer skun out? No, not at that time. The time of this conversation had not been skinned yet? Yes, or had been. It hadn't. When did you get this deer? That night. And how long or how did you get the deer? It was a roadkill. It was hit right up the road from our house. Now, when you get a roadkill, you can't just take that home and eat it necessarily, can you? No. You have got to get a tag in this state? Yes. From the DNR? Yes. You had not hit the deer? No. But you saw it hit? Yes. And knew it was a fresh kill? Yes. So you put it in your truck? Yes. Brought it home? Yes. And it was too late at that point to get the tag? Yes. Did you hang it up that first night? Yes. Who called to get the tag? My mom did. And do you remember whether she called to get the tag, called about the tag, the night you first found the deer or the next day? The night that we found the deer. But you didn't get the tag until the next morning? Yes. Okay. I'm going to show you Exhibit 123. Can you make out what that is? That's a tag. A tag for the deer that was hanging in your garage. Yes. When you had this conversation with Mike? Yes. Okay. While you are putting the climbing sticks on? Yes. All right. Now, the tag is dated November 4th or 11/4/05, isn't it? Yes. Okay. So where did you get the tag? From 310 Mobile. You will have to explain that. At least some of the jurors may not understand this. It's a DNR tag, right? Yes. But the DNR sets it up so that there are local agents or places you can go. Gas stations. Gas stations where you can get the tag? Yes. So you don't have to run to Madison or something? Yes. Okay. And there's a mobile gas station on Highway 310 near your house? Yes. That's what you call the mobile 310? Yes. Did you take the deer to the mobile 310 to get it tagged? Yes. So you had to take it down from where it was hanging in your garage? Yes. For anybody who doesn't know, why do you hang a deer? It helps cure the meat. And do you hang it before you skin it or after you skin it or both? I usually hang it and skin it, then you let it hang for a day. Okay. But you didn't skin it the first night you had it? No. Because you had to get it tagged? Yes. So you took it down the morning of the 4th of November? Yes. Went and got it tagged yourself? Yes. And I want to be clear about that. Even though your mom had called about the tag, you actually took the deer to get it tagged? Yes. Because she was off to work on a Friday morning? Yes. November 4th was Friday? Yes. Now, you bring the deer back and you have the deer tagged, I assume, right? Yes. What did you do with the deer at that point? I hung it up again and skun it out. Okay. And was it that night that you hung it up again and skun it out that you had this conversation with Mike? No, it was the night before. The night before? Yes. Okay. You remember talking to us last night? Yes. And telling us that it was the second time you hung the deer and the deer was skun out when you were doing the climbing sticks? Yes. You remember that the conversation with Mike happened after the news of Teresa Halbach's disappearance had been on TV? Yes. That you are certain of? Yes, it was that day. After it was on TV? Yes. Okay. Now, Thursday night, November 3rd, you would have gone to work? Yes. You would have left for work about 9:30? Yes. To be there a little bit before your 10 o'clock shift? Yes. Friday nights, you don't have to work? No. That is, for you, the work week ends at 6 o'clock on Friday morning, right? But it starts up again at 10 o'clock on Sunday night? Yes. Actually, Friday night and Saturday night are it's your weekend? Yes. So Friday night, 6:30 or 7, Mike's over and you don't have to go to work that night. Yes, but you have heard the night before, or not you, I guess, but the night before, the news has been on the TV about Miss Halbach disappearing. Yes. The let me just get that up on the screen so the jury can see the date on it. Boy, that's tough. It washes out. This isn't a picture you took? No. That's deer blood on the left. Yes. Side. We can't do it this way, but what I'm looking at is way over on the right side of this tag. It says the date of issuance of the permit/tag. Do you see that? Yes. And what is the date of issuance on the permit/tag? 11/4/05. Attorney Strang then says, Your Honor, maybe I will just, if I may, just pass this around the jury in the old-fashioned way. The court says, any objection? And the prosecutor, Attorney Kratz, says no. And the court then says, go ahead. And Attorney Strang then continues his questioning. As you and Mike were putting these climbing sticking pads on the deer stand, your Uncle Stephen walked over to the garage? Yes. Came in, he and Mike had some conversation? Yes. You didn't catch the first part of the conversation, I gather? Yes. That is, I mean, you did not catch? No, I didn't. So you don't personally know whether Mike started the conversation or Steve did? No, I don't. What you caught was Steve making a joke about want to help me get rid of a body or dispose of a body, something like that? Yes. That was clear to you. It was a joke? Yes. Mike laughed? Yes. You laughed? Yes. And Steve followed that up by saying something like, people go missing all the time, and this girl may have left for Mexico? Yes. Did you guys laugh about that too? Yes. Was this the first that you learned that Teresa Halbach was missing? Yes. But one or both of them, from a conversation, had seen it on TV? Yes. What the TV had said, well, I guess you hadn't seen the TV, but you eventually did see TV reports? Yes. Of Miss Halbach missing, and it described her as missing? Yes. At least for the first several days? Yes. Now, you, I think, beginning on November 5th, which is the day you tried to come home and found Jambo Creek Road blocked off? Yes. Saturday? Yes. Okay. Beginning that day, you were coming home to try to get your Labrador puppy back after goose hunting? Yes. In the morning? Yes. With Mike again, actually, right? Yes. Okay. So you come back and you can't get to your house because the police have the road blocked off? Yes. Beginning that, right then and there, for probably over 3 hours that Saturday, November 5th, you've talked to the police a number of times? Yes. About the investigation into Teresa Halbach's disappearance and death? Yes. It was a little over 3 hours, as you recall, that first day, Saturday, before you could get your dog back? Yes, it was about 3.5 hours. Okay. And then at least 2 other times you were interviewed in the weeks or days, weeks, months following Teresa Halbach's disappearance? Yes. In any one of those conversations with the police, did any police officer ever ask you about this joke that you overheard between Mike and Steve in the garage? No. If we go back to Friday, November 4th, again, later in the night, do you remember either yourself or your Uncle Stephen getting a call, probably on a cell phone, from your Uncle Chuck? No. Something about having seen headlights back by his house? Not that I remember. And asking you guys to check it out? Not that I remember. You have no recollection at this point, now, of having driven down in the pit to see if you and Steve could find the source of these headlights that Chuck was talking about? Not that I remember. Okay, but you stayed home that weekend. You did not go up to Crivets? Yes. You were asked yesterday by Mr. Kratz about, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to Monday, October 31st. I'm hopping around a little bit, but we're back to Monday, October 31st. You were asked, whether you heard a telephone call come in from Teresa Halbach at about 11:45 in the morning? No. That is, you were sleeping then? Yes. And you are a sound sleeper? Yes. The answering machine is in the living room? Yes. Which is sort of next to and west of your bedroom? Yes. But it's not in your room? No. That answering machine is the kind that, you have heard calls come in to the answering machine, I take it? Yes. Just not this one? No. When a call comes in and you don't answer and it goes to the answering machine, this is the kind of answering machine where you hear the caller leaving the message? Yes. It's like a speakerphone. It broadcasts, so to speak? Yes. Okay. But even with that, you didn't hear Teresa Halbach leave her message? No. You had, I think, said yesterday that on Halloween, you had no reason to be in your Uncle Stephen's garage? Yes, that's true. No verbal response. Now, you had been in that garage on various times before? Yes. Been in there since? Yes. Typically, if you were going to go in Stephen's garage, it would be because he was asking for your help on fixing a car or a snowmobile or something? Yes. He would ask your help occasionally? Yes. Ask for Brendan's help occasionally? Yes. Ask for Blaine's help occasionally? Yes. Maybe Brian, your older brother, when he still lived there? Yes. When you got up that afternoon on Halloween and you happened to look out the window, you see the woman you now know as Teresa Halbach? Yes. Your recollection is that she is wearing a black coat? Yes. It came down below her hips? Yes. That she was wearing trousers? Yes. They were black? I do not know the color. It's been a while since then, but one of the times you talked to the police, specifically a Calumet County investigator named John Dietering, was back in February 27th of 2006, coming up on a year ago? Yes. Back then, when you were talking to investigator Dietering, the events of Halloween 2005 were a little fresher in your mind? Yes. Did you try to tell investigator Dietering the truth as best you recalled it when you talked with him? Yes. Not just on February 27th, but each time you talked to him? Yes. You think reviewing his report might help refresh your recollection about what exactly Miss Halbach was wearing the day you saw her? Yes. At this point, exhibit number 124 is marked for identification, and Attorney Strang says, just going to put an exhibit sticker on this so we know what we're talking about. And then he continues, I'm going to show you exhibit 124, which is just investigator Dietering's report. And I want you just to read this to yourself. You are welcome to look at all of it or any of it if you want to. I thought that this paragraph on page 2 of the report might be the most helpful, but you look at whatever you want, just read it to yourself. All done? Yes. Okay. Does that help you remember today a little better what Miss Halbach was wearing back on Halloween 2005? Yes. When you saw her? Was it black trousers you saw? I honestly don't remember now. You don't. What did this help you remember? That she was wearing black trousers. Okay. That's at least what you told investigator Dietering back when this was fresher in your mind? Yes. But you cannot recall what color her top was? No. What you saw Miss Halbach do as you were looking out that kitchen window you described, or the window near the kitchen, you saw her taking a photograph or two of the van, right? Yes. And then you go hop in the shower? Yes. A very quick shower. You told us yesterday? Yes. 3-4 minutes? Yes. Okay. And then the next time you can look out the window, presumably you have put some clothes on. Yes. So that takes a minute or two, or what? Yes. Do you look out the same window then again? Yes. And now you see her sort of walking towards your Uncle Stephen's trailer? Yes. Not too long after that, You leave the house with your bow to go hunting? Yes. Her SUV is still there? Yes. But you don't see her? No. And you don't see your Uncle Stephen at the moment? No. You are not looking for either one of them? No. You are just going out to get in your truck? Yes. Your truck is the other direction, so to speak. It's away from Stephen's house? Yes. Tell, tell the jury, did you hear a lot of horrible screaming when you came walking out with the bow? No, I didn't hear anything. Anybody crying for help? No. Was there any background noise that you remember that would have blocked out those sort of sounds? And not that I remember. Did you, as you drove off then to go deer hunting, it's what, 2:45 or 3, somewhere in that? Yes. Range? Yes. The deer, I guess probably, in general, aren't going to be up out of their beds and feeding, looking around for food in November until close to dusk? Yes. You are just driving 2 miles to your little hunting area? Yes. By yourself? Yes. Is it that you like to get up in the stand, especially early? Yes. So you don't spook the deer or something? Yes. Okay. Even if you are going to have to wait a couple of hours for dusk? Yes. Anybody see you? Yes. As you are going hunting? Who? Scott Taddick. Scott Taddick? Yes. Okay. Was he a friend of your mom's at that point? Yes. How do you know he saw you? Because I passed him on the highway. Okay. And what you told Investigator Dietering is that Mr. Taddick would be available to verify precisely what time he had seen you? Yes. Why did you think that? Maybe he looked at his clock in his truck? Had you talked with him with Mr. Taddick, about whether he could verify precisely when he saw you? No. You were just kind of hoping or guessing that maybe he could? Yes. What sort of, well, you were bow hunting that day. Do you also participate in the gun season for deer? Yes. What do you use as a deer rifle? A 30-06. Is that yours? Yes. Do you have any other guns? Yes. What other long guns? I have shotguns, mostly all shotguns. Mostly all shotguns. But back at the end of October 2005, you also had a 22 caliber rifle? Yes. Marlin? Yes. Semi-automatic? Yes. And then your mom had a bolt-action 22 rifle in her bedroom, right? Yes. You kept your Marlin 22 semi-automatic in your bedroom? Yes. Mr. Dassey, just to finish, are you quite sure now, whatever details you don't remember of Halloween 2005, today, are you quite sure now that you woke up and got up sometime by 2:30 or a little before? Yes. You said yesterday that Blaine and Brendan were still in high school. Got home usually, what, 3:40, 3:45, somewhere in there? Yes. And that was regular every day? Yes, every day. Because they took a school bus to and from school? Yes. School lets out at the same time. The bus runs the same route, that they were pretty regular. Yes. And are you quite sure that Blaine and Brendan coming home that Halloween 2005 were not the ones who found you still asleep and awakened you? No. And if Blaine told the police that you were still sleeping at 3:40 or 3:45 when he got home from the school bus and that you awoke after he got home, Blaine is just mistaken? Yes. Attorney Strang then says, "That's all I have. Thanks." The redirect is then done by Attorney Kratz, again, the prosecutor. Mr. Dassey, you stated today on cross-examination that you believe that you saw Teresa walking towards your Uncle Steve's trailer after your shower. Is that right? Yes. Did you see where Miss Halbach parked her SUV? Yes. Where was that? Just in front of the van, on the north side of the driveway. No obstruction to your view of that? No. Mr. Strang showed you a police report, an investigative report prepared by Investigator Dietering. Did you get a chance to look at that today? Yes. Have you had a chance to look at that before today that you can recall? Yes. When I asked yesterday when the last time you saw a fire at Steve's burn area was, Attorney Strang then interrupts and says, scope. And then Kratz continues, do you recall what your answer was? Attorney Strang then says, scope. The court says, just a second. There's an objection that it's beyond the scope of redirect. Is that correct? Attorney Strang says, of cross, yes. Beyond the scope of cross. So it's not proper redirect. Attorney Kratz then says, it's what else he told Investigator Dietering. He showed him the very exhibit that I'm intending to refer to. The court says, no, I don't think that's enough. It wasn't something that was dealt with on cross, so I'm going to sustain the objection. Attorney Kratz then says, all right, and then continues. You said that you saw Scott Taddick on the way to deer hunting. About what time was it that you saw him? Do you recall? 2:45. About 2:45 p.m.? Yes. So you had already seen Teresa Halbach by 2:45 and, in fact, had already left your residence. Is that right? No, she was still there. What I'm saying is, you had already seen her? Oh, yes. And had left your residence? Yes. By 2:45? Yes. Mr. Strang asked if you heard any screaming or if you heard any other noises when you got into your truck. Were you listening for anything like that? No. How long does it take from exiting your trailer until you get into your truck? How far of a distance was that? Maybe 10 feet. I had parked it right in front of the door. How long would it take you to get into your car? Maybe 10 seconds. Oh, so in those 10 seconds, you didn't hear any screaming or any calls for help? No. Is that right? Attorney Kratz then says, I think that's all, Judge. Thank you. And Attorney Strang says, no recross, Your Honor, which I'm very actually surprised about. The court says, very well, Mr. Dassey, you are excused. Okay, so here's a really quick synopsis on what happened between the defense and then the prosecution, again, having a go at Bobby Dassey. So during the cross-examination by the defense, of course, its defense attorney, Jerry Strang, asked him about his family, the layout of the salvage yard, and then the events surrounding the Halloween of 2005. And Bobby explains that he lives with his mom, Barb, and his younger brothers, Blaine and Brendan, which, as you know, was one of the others implicated in this whole case. But essentially, they lived in this trailer near Stephen, and other family members, lived on the property. But Strang then dives into Bobby's knowledge about the salvage yard, including how the cars were stripped, crushed, or melted down. I'm sure that he's going somewhere with us. Then he gets to the part where he's asking about, the whole reason everybody's here is Teresa Halbach and the date that, she went missing and so forth. He asks Bobby about his encounter that he had with his uncle Stephen on November 4th, when Bobby and his friend Mike were in the garage putting together this deer hunting gear. They had picked up this roadkill deer the night before, hung it in the garage, were preparing to get it tagged in the morning, but while working, Stephen came in and there was this whole back and forth joke, which we kind of learned in the first portion of Bobby's testimony, that there was this back and forth joke about, somebody saying, hey, what happened to Teresa, where you hiding the body, said this to Stephen. And, Stephen said something about maybe she'd gone to Mexico. Bobby insists that this comment was clearly a joke and that both he and Mike had laughed it off. Strang then asks Bobby what he remembers seeing that day, because he claims he saw Teresa taking photos of the van in the driveway at about 2:30 in the afternoon, that he then took a quick shower and then looked outside again for some reason and saw her walking towards Stephen's trailer before he then jumped in his car to leave and go deer hunting. He says that he didn't see Stephen or Teresa again, and when he's asked if he heard any screaming or crying or yelling or anything as he left his house and walked out to his car to leave, he didn't hear anything. But then, and this is weird, right? Then he says that, hey, he can prove that he was actually on the road because he saw his mom's, I don't know, friend, boyfriend, I don't know what he was at the time, Scott Taddock, he passed him on the road. And that Bobby said, oh, Scott could totally confirm the time that he saw him. And, he's asked, well, how? Well, he probably looked at the clock on his truck or whatever. And I'm like, well, this is really weird. So yeah, we'll probably get into that later. I'm pretty sure Scott takes the stand in one of these days. And Bobby also, he insists that he was up and moving and getting ready to leave before his brothers even got home from school. But even though it's insinuated that his brother Blaine, who was still in high school, he and Brendan were still in high school, said something different than that. So then when Kratz gets a chance to talk to him about that, he focuses on narrowing down like Bobby's timeline. And Bobby confirms that he left for hunting about 2:45 after he saw Teresa evidently head towards Stephen Avery's trailer. Now, I don't know if Mike takes the stand, but I'm really surprised that they didn't bring up the whole portion about Mike saying, "Oh, hey, no, this conversation took place like a week after everybody else is saying that this happened," because that's evidently what this guy Mike told the actual police, which would be not exactly true because if it were on that date, there's no way he could have seen Stephen because Stephen was already arrested and in jail by that point in time. So kind of curious to see if he shows up on the stand. So let's continue with the rest of what happened after Bobby Dassey was excused. And then Attorney Strang, again, defense, says, Your Honor, I will move Exhibit 123, or Exhibit 123 and 124 was used only to refresh. The court says, any objection? Attorney Kratz then says, no. And the court says, very well, the exhibit is admitted. Attorney Strang then says, and we could probably have just a quick minute at sidebar. Jeez, again. The court says, all right. And at this point, a sidebar is taken. And the court then says, members of the jury, I'm going to excuse you for a couple minutes. I don't believe this is going to turn into our morning break. So I will excuse you for just a few minutes and we'll call you back as soon as we're ready to proceed. Again, as always, do not discuss the case during the break. So the jury leaves and now the jury is not present. And the court then says, you may be seated, Mr. Strang. And Attorney Strang says, as I understand the narrow point of disagreement of the unreported sidebar, Mr. Kratz is under the belief that I had asked all the questions on which we sought a stipulation on Michael Osmundson's testimony, and that he left them go by without hearsay objection, so that there was no need for a stipulation. And I did not ask all the questions. There remains a couple of important points that I did not inquire about, and that I do want the stipulation on. I did ask one important one, and we could leave that off now. I agree, there is no need for a cumulative stipulation on that. The point I did not go into, because Mr. Dassey testified here on cross that he didn't hear the beginning of the conversation. And I think he said he doesn't, or agreed, he didn't recall whether Michael started it or Steve started the conversation. So what I would need is Michael indicated he was aware of Stephen was one of the last people to see the missing girl and jokingly asked Stephen if Stephen had her. The missing girl in a closet. That's the chunk of it. The start of the conversation that I didn't cover and could not cover with Brendan Dassey because Attorney Kratz says Bobby Dassey. The court says, Bobby Dassey, you meant? Attorney Strang says, I'm sorry, Bobby Dassey, yes, because he did not hear it. I did cover the Mexico statement. Stephen stated that people go missing all the time and the girl may have left for Mexico. I think I did cover that. Mr. Kratz didn't object. We can omit that from the stipulation at this point. Again, I'm not looking to make it cumulative. And the court says, all right. I should note before I hear from Mr. Kratz that the purpose of the sidebar was counsel asking the court for an opportunity to bring this matter to the court's attention. Very short sidebar. I heard no argument from either party during the sidebar, but simply excused the jury so that I could hear argument at this time. And Attorney Strang says, that's right. And again, that sidebar was at defense request. The court says, Mr. Kratz. And Attorney Kratz says, Judge, I have no objection to the court reading those, which would now be those 3 sentences that were asked by stipulation, omitting the paragraph that starts with, quote, according to Michael, unquote. And also, as Mr. Strang had alerted the court early this morning, the sentence that begins, quote, Michael stated he had just learned, unquote, that sentence to be admitted. But the balance of that paragraph, beginning with, quote, he stated he and Bobby, unquote, and ending with the phrase, quote, missing girl, unquote, with the one sentence being omitted. If that's going to end this issue, Judge, I don't have any objection to agreeing that that be provided to the court. Make sure that the court has omitted or crossed out that one line Michael stated he had learned. But other than that, Judge, we'll agree to that stipulation. Don't you just love how Kratz is like, hey, court, this is what you're supposed to do, so do this, as if he's the one in charge. The court then says, I'm going to ask someone to read to me what it is you do want presented to the jury because I'm having trouble following this. And Attorney Strang says, I will read it just as I would propose to read it to the jury. If he were called to testify, Michael Osmundson, the parties agree, would testify that he stated he and Bobby were inside the Dassey garage when Stephen came over. Michael indicated he was aware Stephen was one of the last people to see the missing girl and jokingly asked Stephen if Stephen had her, the missing girl, in a closet. At this point, Stephen asked Michael if Michael wanted to help bury the body, and they laughed about this together. He once again indicated, that is, Mr. Osmundson once again indicated, he thought Stephen might have been the last one to see the missing girl. And the court says, and that's what the state is agreeing? Attorney Kratz says, that's just fine, Judge. Attorney Strang then says, and, well, okay. Mr. Buting, one of the other defense attorneys, points out that the next sentence, according to, is different than the testimony that I elicited from Mr. Dassey. I don't remember exactly the words now. I got into something about maybe she went to Mexico, as I recall, and the court says, well, I'm not going to, from the bench, impose a stipulation on the parties. And Attorney Strang says, right. And the court says, if you folks have an agreement and you wish to read something to the jury and each of you agrees to it, I will allow you to do that. Attorney Kratz then says, counsel asked the question about she may have gone to Mexico. We do object to that. We don't object to the other part of the stipulation, once again, as I indicated, to put this matter to rest. The court then says, and Mr. Strang, you are going to present that to the jury as a stipulation. Mr. Kratz will agree on the record. I will let the jury know that it's a stipulation and they can take it as evidence. Attorney Strang then says, okay, no problem with in the last sentence there for context, saying, Mr. Osmundson once again, instead of he once again. And Attorney Kratz says, that's fine. And the court says, very well, all right, we'll bring the jurors back in. Mr. Kratz, I would like to take morning break about 10:30. So if you are still in your direct, Attorney Kratz says, I will stop. And the court continues, stop. And then the jury comes back in and the court says, you may be seated. Members of the jury, before we proceed to the next witness, the parties have a stipulation to put on the record. Mr. Strang. Attorney Strang then gets up and says, thank you, Your Honor. The parties, I think, have agreed that if he were called to testify, a man named Mike Osmundson would testify that he stated he and Bobby were inside the Dassey garage when Stephen came over. Michael indicated he was aware Stephen was one of the last people to see the missing girl, and jokingly asked Stephen if Stephen had her, the missing girl, in a closet. At this point, Stephen asked Michael if Michael wanted to help bury the body, and they laughed about this together. Mr. Osmundson once again indicated he thought Stephen might have been the last one to see the missing girl. And the court says, Mr. Kratz, is that the state's understanding of the stipulation? Attorney Kratz says, it is, Judge. And the court says, very well, members of the jury, based on that stipulation, you may accept the facts read by Mr. Strang as evidence in this case. At this time, Mr. Kratz, you may call your next witness. And I don't know about you, but I kind of need a full debriefing on what the hell that just was. I'm so kind of confused right now. So let's break it down. Okay, so again, the stipulation stuff, right? So if you recall earlier, the defense had asked the prosecution to agree to this stipulation before the witness testified. But the prosecutor, Kratz, says, nope, not yet. I'm only going to agree after the questioning is all done. So basically, he wanted to keep his options open until he saw if the defense tried to pull anything unexpected with Bobby while he was on the stand. So why is this even happening in the first place, right? Because I thought a witness comes on the stand, the prosecution asks questions, the defense asks questions, then the prosecution comes back to talk about like, hey, this is what the defense said, so let me ask you about this. Uh, Essentially, the stipulation means that the jury will accept something as fact without seeing or hearing the evidence in real time. And this most likely, I can't speak for them, but most likely relates to Mike Osmondson. This is Bobby's friend who was in the garage when Steven made this joke, or there was this joke between the two. We're still not exactly entirely sure who started the joke because Bobby can't say either way. This garage conversation is one of the few pieces of testimony that directly ties Stephen Avery to the idea of disposing of a body, even if it was just a joke. If two people say they heard it, it makes it a little bit stickier. But if Mike takes the stand and then undercuts what Bobby has to say or had to say, or seems even unsure about it, this could make the story weaker. So if he says, yeah, I was there, it was clearly a joke, then Kratz might decide, fine, let's just stipulate to that and move on. So this is about whether or not Mike's story matches Bobby's and how much weight the jury should give to this alleged joke. All right, so now that all of this is over with, let's move on to the post-conviction information that Stephen Avery's post-conviction attorney, Kathleen Zellner, discovered about Bobby that kind of puts him into the spotlight. So there are multiple, and I mean multiple documents that were filed by Kathleen Zellner on behalf of Stephen Avery that deal with Bobby Dassey. And instead of going through all of the individual ones and then, reading it verbatim because that would take for frickin' ever. So here is a summary of what all of these say. Kathleen Zellner literally goes directly for and points the finger right at Bobby Dassey. And she's not just speculating here. According to her, Bobby was actually the last person to see Teresa Halbach alive. And his story is shifting. His timeline doesn't quite hold up. And the more that you dig into it, the more it starts to not make any sense. But the biggest bombshell of all of this was the Dassey family computer. Because in 2018, years after this happened, Zellner discovered a CD that the state had in its possession, but had never handed over to the defense. And what was important about this CD was that it had thousands of images. And this is kind of hard to hear, so just bear with me. Thousands of images of violent porn, torture, mutilation, and some of it possibly involving minors. It's dark, it's very graphic, and it lines up with the kind of content that might suggest a motive, sexual motive, for a violent crime. And this computer, as mentioned, came from the Dassey family. And Zellner says that Bobby was the one who was accessing this computer. The files were tied to his user account, and they were viewed during times that only made sense if he was the one on the computer. This wasn't just some random shared family thing. The state argues, of course they do, the state's argument is that, well, it could have been someone else, but they don't offer any proof of that. Then it gets worse. In a new twist, there's another witness that comes forward. His first name is Thomas, And he comes forward and he says that he saw Bobby pushing Teresa's SUV onto the Avery property after she was reported missing. He was by himself and he was in the dark, and no one followed up. No one documented this. Zellner argues that this is direct evidence of Bobby possibly planting the car and framing his own uncle. Add all this up. Zellner is making a case that Bobby had motive, he had means, and he had opportunity. He was home alone when Teresa showed up. He accessed violent material. He lied or misled about key parts of his timeline and might have moved the vehicle. And, there's been quite a bit of time between this trial, right, back in 2007 and today, 2025. All of these different documents have gone through multiple courts, and the courts so far weren't biting on this. The Court of Appeals said that Zellner didn't prove that Bobby had a strong enough motive under Wisconsin's legal standard for naming an alternate suspect. This is also called the Denny standard. But she turns around and says, this is not how it's supposed to work. She doesn't need to prove that Bobby did it. She just needs to show that a jury should have heard this information and that it could have changed their decision. And even as recently as 2024, she filed new motions for touch DNA testing on Teresa's RAV4. These are parts of the car that were never tested before. And she wants to see if Bobby's DNA is on the gear shift, the steering wheel, or the cargo area, because if it is, it changes everything. So yeah, after hearing Bobby Dassey on the stand, just remember, the most damning testimony in this case might not be what he actually said, but what he never got asked about, because no one knew the information. It was withheld. And that's it for this episode. I'm curious as to, what your opinions are on this. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate all of you so much. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so that you get notified every single time a brand new episode goes live. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next episode. We will talk soon. Bye for now.